and kind of get going here. And I wanted to jump live and talk to you because I want to keep the information coming. I want to continue to come to you with information that we can talk about, that we can read and talk about and discuss together around ancient Kemet and kind of take the mystery out of history. You know, if you begin to examine things for yourself, you can take the mystery about it and not let people examine things for you and let God speak to you. Just like our ancestors talked all about having communications and relationships with God and relations with God, that idea can still be with us today. We can also look at our spirituality from a historical standpoint and see what we can learn from our ancestors and apply today. And that's really what the Battle of Kadesh is about. We're going to talk about that and read through a documentation and talk a little about what happened at the Battle of Kadesh and what was Ramses II really talk about. It really becomes a spiritual account if you look at it deeply and you find things that you want to get out of it. So I want to kind of jump to that today. And as we talk about it, I want to thank you guys so much up front. If you get a chance to like this video, share this with somebody. Tell somebody about it. Let's talk about it. Let's relive these things for ourselves and let's get more information about it. And I always get information and questions about how you can support. I put some things down in the description below. Being able to support my books on Amazon. And if you wanted to support directly with Cash App, I've gotten that question. I want to put it out there. Red and Black Ink. That's the name of my company, Red and Black Ink. If you like to support, feel free. I appreciate it very much. And it's interesting, when I named the company, I had no idea that a lot of the texts that they were writing in ancient Kemet were written in red and black ink. When you look at a lot of the perm, the Ru, and various things like that. So it's interesting that I picked that name. But if you're able to reach out, I very much appreciate your support via Cash App, but whatever you'd like to do, being able to share this and listening to it is better than anything. So I want to jump in and talk about the Battle of Kadesh and what we get out of it. And this is obviously Ramses II. This is Ramses II and his image, if you will, from Abu Simbel there in Nubia, in the southern part of Egypt today, which would have been ancient Nubia, lower Nubia back in the day. We're going to talk about the Battle of the Kadesh, which is his most famous battle. And one of the more famous battles in history, when you think about ancient history, is one of the more famous battles in history. And why was that? You know, Ramses II was such a towering figure in ancient Kemet, largely because of his building monuments and his being in power for so long. He ruled for some 66 years, more than 60 years. He was such an overwhelming figure, if you will, in ancient Kemetic history. We want to talk about the name. And I want to say up front, the resource that I'm going to talk about, that we're going to go over, is a resource that allows you to kind of read through some of the actions with respect to the Battle of Kadesh, which I've kind of summarized and taken some sources for that. This is a resource that I'm going to make available to those who are paid subscribers. So if you are a member on Facebook or YouTube, it's $4.99 a month, $4.99 a month. And if you are there and you're a paid subscriber, I'm going to make this resource available so that you can download it on my website. I'll give you access to that page where you can download it and read it for yourself and kind of go through it. Because I believe it's not enough for us just to hear it. We have to see it. And there's something special about reading where you can take this information and start to make it your own and kind of look at it. So I want to mention that up front. I want to go through this resource and let's talk about the Battle of Kadesh, right? And who was Ramses II and why was this significant? And what do we talk about with respect to that? So as we talk about Ramses II, he ruled from about 1279 BC to about 1213 BC. And last night we talked about Ptah, who was his son, who had that famous stela, if you will, the famous stela that people call the Israel stela because it mentions the name Israel in it. And also people had some questions about the translation of it. Just to let you know, a lot of the things that I've read, they will translate it into the Kemetic term and then just give you what that means in terms of today's or later terms as well. So a lot of that is stuff that has been translated, and that was from the stela of Ptah. Yesterday we talked about that. Some people call that the Israel stela. Well, that's Ramses II's son. And Ramses II himself is the son of Seti I, who did a lot of buildings and a lot of temples and things in Abydos, as well as in what is in southern Waset. That was Seti's first. That was Ramses II's father. So he comes right between Seti I and Ramses II, then Ptah, his son. And that becomes like a line of succession, if you will, in terms of kingship in the 19th dynasty, the early part of the 19th dynasty. So Ramses II was around, like I said, from 1279 to 1213 BC. And he becomes an interesting figure. So I mentioned some of the things that are significant about him. And I'll say again, if you are a member on YouTube or a subscriber on Facebook, paid member or paid subscriber, you will have access to this resource very shortly. I'll be uploading it to a page on my website where you have access to it and be able to download it. But, you know, some of the things about Ramses II, and, you know, I mentioned that some people will say that maybe Ptah was the pharaoh or the king during the Exodus, if that took place. People also will say a lot that Ramses II was because he ruled so long, and this was during a period of time that it might have happened according to biblical sources. even though there aren't historical sources to support that according to biblical sources. But he's famous for that reason, that people will associate him for that. But he ruled in ancient Kemet for over 60 years. He was also someone who built a whole lot of monuments. So when you think about monuments, and we're going to dig into his monuments, we're going to talk about his mortuary temple. We're going to talk about the temples he built in the Sudan and what is today the Sudan, and places out in various places. Or he had a huge building campaign, and what he did in honor of his father. I was reading some things today in terms of things he said in honor of his father, Seti, about how a father is a champion of their son. And a son, when the father passes away, becomes a champion of his father. And how you begin to represent those people who've passed on. So that becomes a significant part of the Kemetic way of life and what Ramses II was talking about. So he did a lot in terms of military engagements, building monumental things. As I mentioned, he was the son of Seti I, and he was the father of Ptah. And so as a father of Ptah, he was somebody who left big shoes to fill. He left very big shoes to fill. And one of the most famous things that he did in his life that was documented, it was taking part in the Battle of Kadesh. So what happened during the Battle of Kadesh, and it was something, the reason why it becomes famous is because of the way he documented it, what he talked about, and the manner in which it was written. It was beautifully written, and it becomes a very spiritual document when you think about it. So somewhere in the early part of his reign, and he reigned for over 60 years, somewhere in the early part of his reign, some people believe that it may have been down to like maybe in the 5th year of his reign. He had a campaign. He went to what is today northern Syria. So if I kind of set that up for you, you look at this document here where the arrow is. He went to what is today northern Syria, right south, some miles south of what is today modern day Aleppo. And so he was there to fight the Hittite army. And you may be familiar with the Hittite people and the Hittite army and the Hittites being talked about in biblical terms, or just as an historical group of people, if you will. He was there to fight the Hittite army, and the Hittites were becoming a power. This whole area of the world, people were always trying to invade Egypt, ancient Kemet. They were always trying to come into the areas that were under Kemet's control for various regions in that area in northern Africa, as well as to the east of it. That was a place that, it's happened all over history, right? People have had wars to try to take over places, and that place is no different. Well, he is coming in this situation in the early part of his reign, about the 5th year of his reign, and he's going to take on the Hittite army head on. And so here is Ramses II. He is traveling into northern Syria, and it's very interesting. He talks about, he has his army separated into 4 units. His army is separated into 4 units. One is called the brigade, if you will, of Amen. The other one is called Ra, Ptah, and Set. So he has this huge army of thousands of men. They're separated into 4 groups each, and he is the head of the group that he calls Amen. And think about that. Think about that from a spiritual standpoint, because as we start to talk about the Battle of Kadesh, everybody I know, everybody that I've read, and you can tell me more because maybe you've read about it, everybody that I've read has talked about this as if it is just a military, historical, strategic type of thing. And what can we learn about military history? And what can we learn about fighting? We don't ever talk about it in a spiritual context, and it's all over the document. When we think about ancient Kemetic people, everything they did was for religious reasons. Everything they did was for spiritual reasons. And I was reading something earlier today that was talking about the Battle of Kadesh. And it's so funny. The person who was reading about it, talking about it, and writing about it was saying that when you look at some of the accounts about the Battle of Kadesh and other things that have talked about other type of military battles, it's written from just parts of it it's just a spiritual talk. It's just written from a spiritual perspective, and as if that doesn't offer much information, as if that doesn't offer much value. There are a lot of people who talk about ancient Kemet and give no respect to their spirituality, give no respect for the reasons why they went into whatever they did. They built the monuments that they did, or they went into war, or they built the temples. Their whole entire way of life, which the monuments that we respect is a part of, that's an outgrowth of their way of life. Well, a lot of the historians completely look at it from a militaristic, materialistic, simply historical facts things without looking at the why behind the what. And what's the purpose of studying history if you don't dig deeper into it? So that's why I want to look at this Battle of Kadesh and not just talk about it in one way, talk about it in several ways. So as we talk about this, let's get into what he did and why he did it. So he has his army separated into 4 groups: the Amen group, the Ra group, the Ptah group, and Set. And you probably know something about these deities, but I'll talk about them real quick. Amen is considered like the hidden one, the hidden aspect of God. And if you read a decent amount of Kemetic literature, you know that in a lot of ways they don't they don't get mad at each other for saying Amen Ra or combining aspects of deities, because they're all expressions of the same thing. They're all expressions of God. So Neter being the force that brought all things into being, and then there being a hidden aspect of God that was called Amen, a creative aspect of God that they call Ptah, a radiating life force energy aspect of God that they call Ra, and Set was an aspect of God, and Set sometimes is made out to be the anti-hero, the one who fights Haru in the famous Asarian tale, but he's also there as a god of force and a god of protection, that aspect of God, that energy that you need to fight when you are fighting people and everybody has knives and spears and arrows and you're going to do hand-to-hand combat that could kill you. There's a lot of energy you have to get up to do that. And so Set was somebody they looked at, an expression, an energy force that you would need when you went into battle. So he had these 4 different groups, if you will, of his army set up. And as they went to Aleppo, the south of Aleppo, they were in Syria, they were about to fight. And it's kind of interesting because as they were there, the story goes, and these are documents that are on the walls at temples in Karnak and Luxor and Abydos and in his funerary mortuary temple. These are the accounts. So these are all the accounts of this battle that I'm talking about, that we're going to translate and talk about today. And so as he gets to that part of Syria, what is today Syria, and he's there and he has his armies and the 4 units, and they end up capturing 2 people. And the 2 people they were soldiers from the Hittite army. And as they were soldiers from the Hittite army, they were really spies. But Ramses II doesn't know it at first. They're spies. And they were sent by the Hittite army on purpose to basically tell him a lie. They were pretending like they were running away from the Hittite army, and they get an audience in front of Ramses because they were captured. They get an audience in front of him and they say, oh, great Ramses. They're giving him all this kind of prop and kind of bowing down to him. And they say, no, we knew your army would come and your army would basically slaughter the Hittite army, that they have no chance against your great army. So we defected. We left, we snuck away, we defected, and we're coming to you. And we're coming to turn ourselves over to you to be on your side. And Ramses asked him the obvious question: what do they know about the Hittite army and where they are stationed? And they told him that they were stationed basically where Aleppo is now, which is miles and miles away from where they were in Kadesh, that they were miles and miles away, very far away, and that's where they were stationed, and they were planning to come at some point in time in the future, but that they were a long way away. So Ramses, assuming that he had these people who were actually spies and telling him a lie, he assumes that they were telling the truth. He believes it, and he takes his Amen portion of his army and he goes ahead of the other 3 units. So he separates himself from his other 3 units and he goes ahead, his advanced guard. And he goes on the northwestern side of Kadesh, which is farther south from Aleppo, but that's where he parks his army, so to speak. Well, it just turns out the Hittite army was not very far away. And what happens after Ramses II separates himself from the 3 units of his army, and he takes his own unit, they end up on the road capturing another several set of people who were Hittite army people, Hittite soldiers. This time they were not spies, and this time they were not lying. They were basically interrogated. I think they were beaten, and they were forced to confess and say, where's the Hittite army? They were asked the same questions, and they basically said, well, the other people told you a lie because the Hittite army is right on the other side of Kadesh. You guys are here on the northwest. They're on the northeast side of Kadesh, and they're about to attack. We're about to attack soon. It's going to be what they think is a surprise attack, and that was a trick for you. And Ramses was enraged. He gathered his people together. He gathered his army and his military forces together, and he said, why is it that we had to capture some people on the side of the road and they told us where the Hittite army was? Why isn't it that my officers who are supposed to be, smart officers who are supposed to have good intelligence and be aware of this information, being able to find out what's happening on the ground, intelligence, why is it that you guys didn't know? And this was an area, if you've listened and read about Tutmosis III and Tutmosis I, where they had already gone into this area in Syria years before, 100 years before or more before Ramses II, and they'd already conquered a lot of these lands, and a lot of these lands were already paying tribute to ancient Quebec. So the fact that Ramses was here, it was because the Hittite army was threatening a part of their territory that was under his control. And so he had to go fight him. And, this was taxation and all types of tribute he would get. He had to go fight him. And as he was also mad, he said, not only did my generals and my officers not figure out where the army was, I have governors set up. I have people setting up here as rulers, if you will, in this area. They didn't tell me what was happening. They didn't tell me what was going on in terms of the Hittite army. So he's furious, right? And that's what the account says. And so as he's doing that, he begins to figure out, obviously, that he's been deceived, that he's now on the northwest side of Kadesh, and the Hittite army is really much closer than he expected, not miles and miles away. They're a short distance away, and they start to come and they start to attack him. And they go around the city, they come and attack him, I believe from the south, they come and attack them. And he is just now in a situation where he's cut off. Here's Ramses, he's cut off, and he has this army attacking him. His other 3 units are separated from him kind of far away. He's being attacked now by the Hittite army. And according to the accounts on his walls in his tomb and in his temple, he says that the army, the people who were with him, his bowmen, the archers, the people who were with him, they began to run. That they were being routed by this massive army, because it wasn't just the Hittites, right? What the Hittites did is they developed a coalition for people who probably didn't want to pay tribute to ancient Kemet, people who were in the area who wanted to fight them back and fight them off because they were being controlled by them. They had a whole coalition, so it wasn't just the Hittite army. So now these folks are going here, and they are actually now fighting him. They are actually fighting him, and the people who are on his side, the people who are his army men, his soldiers, they leave him. They desert him. And so Ramses is sitting there, and this is when you start to really understand that this is a spiritual text. This is not just a text about history and about facts that we can divorce ourselves from. It reads something like a holy book. It really begins to read like a holy book. So Ramses sits out there and he calls to our men. He calls to God and he says, my archers and my horsemen and those people who are with me, they have forsaken me. They all left me and they went away from me. Where are you, God? Does a father forget his son? You are my father, amen. And does a father forget his son? Don't I confide in you? Do I rest on my own strength? Do I rely on my own wit and my own ability, or do I rely on you? Every time I go somewhere, whether I'm standing or wherever I am, my face is toward you. When I'm walking, I'm standing, whatever, my face is toward you, and I look to you, God. And he starts to say this beautiful thing. Don't inquire in your mouth, the counsels of your mouth. Well, anybody who is against you, anybody who does not believe in God and does not know God will be abased. They will be brought down. And I am somebody who trusts in you and will not walk away from you. And he starts to go, haven't I filled your temple with spoils? Haven't I taken, thousands of oxen and sacrificed you? Haven't I gotten the choicest stone from very farthest places and given it to you? And it begins to give you insight. And a lot of historians will talk about this. It begins to give you insight as to how the Kemetic people conducted their armies and conducted their wars. Because a lot of times when you see the wars of Thutmose III or the Battle of Kadesh that we're talking about here, Thutmose I, you will find that they took the spoils. Sometimes a lot of times people, but also gold and chariots and cattle and all types of grains and various things that were of importance at the time. And they took it, and a large part of that went to the temples of the God that they were serving. They went to the temples of our men or whatever. They went to the temple to support the temples. And so in a lot of ways, there was religious significance and religious coordination around the battles that they fought. And they talked about that. And he's saying, haven't I gone places and taken the spoils of what I've had and given it to you first? Haven't I given you the best of what I've had to offer? Have I not walked away from you in any way? Haven't I turned my eyes toward you, God? How will you forget me at a time when I'm cut off from everybody and all my soldiers are gone? And so he begins to say, and this is an example, you can see a picture of, this is the mortuary temple of Ramses II, this huge temple that's there in the southern part of Kemet near what would have been Waset at the time. And he's building magnificent building projects for spiritual reasons in honor of God and in honor of himself. And so he's saying, haven't I erected for you great stone buildings? Haven't I done all these things for you? And put things out to sea? And God will bless anybody who obeys them. Anybody who obeys God, God will bless. Those who do not will be cursed. And so as he's saying these remarkable things and he's getting this out, he begins to talk about, even though I had all these people, archers and soldiers and all these people with me, and it looks like I'm abandoned now, I'm on a battlefield and I'm being attacked by thousands of people, he says, God is more helpful to me than myriads of bowmen, than millions of horsemen, than tens of thousands of chosen young men, though they all be gathered together in one place. God is more powerful and helpful to me than 1,000 and thousands and 10,000s of soldiers. God is more powerful and helpful to me. And he says, haven't I reached out to you, God, even from the ends of the earth, will you hear me? And this is a beautiful poetic thing that you hear Ramses II saying to our men, almost something that could be included in the Bible, biblical, if you will. in terms of his spirituality and his poetic nature. And he's saying, God, I've reached out to you to the ends of the world. And then God responds in the documents that he talks about. God responds to him. He said, I prayed to God and I found God. This is what Ramses II said. I found God even in a faraway land. God heard me and my voice resonated all the way back to ancient Kemet, to where the temple of Ipet was. And God heard me. And God responds in this document to him. And he says, move forward. Go ahead and fight. I'm with you. My hand is with you. I will be with you. You don't have to worry about it. You go ahead and fight, and I'm going to take care of it. God says, because I am the one who triumphs over thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands. I am the God of victory, and I love bravery. Think about that for a second. I'm the God of victory, and I love bravery. And then Ramses II says, I found peace in my heart. I found joy. When people left me alone on the battlefield, imagine yourself being in a difficult spot in your life. Whether you look at the history of it or just being in a difficult spot where you feel like people have left and there's nobody but God there, right? There's nobody but God. Even if I'm on this channel and people listen or they don't listen, there's nobody but God there. God is there and God will take care of it. Being able to be in a situation where you might feel like, hey, I'm abandoned. What do I do? Right? And can God then help me and bring me out of this? And this is what Ramses is talking about. This is 3,300 years ago. Kemetic philosophy, Kemetic literature, Kemetic way of life, talking about, I found God and I found peace in my heart. And then what Ramses II decides to do, he says, I launched at them like I was Montu, like I was the epitome of a fighter. I launched at them and I began to fight them and I began to take them in head on. And he begins to say, even though I have thousands of people who are against me, I'm going to begin to run after them and not be afraid. And apparently what he says in his document is he only had his two horses. He had two horses with him and he has armor bearer. And his armor bearer got scared and wanted to leave and leave and say, look, hey, King, we're doing this, but we about to get killed because you got all these people coming at you. You have thousands of people coming at you. Why don't we leave and save our own lives? Because, our soldiers are gone. Everybody's defeated us. And Ramses tell him, sit back, steady your heart. Don't be afraid and watch God work. And then Ramses goes on to fight. And he goes and he talks about fighting his enemies and that everything he did, everything that was desired in his heart came through. He starts to then question, why are my enemies weak? It was almost like I was God himself chopping them down. All of them are weak. They begin to not know how to hold a bow and arrow. They began to not know how to hold a spear. Their limbs became weak. They dropped their arrows and they dropped their weapons as I slew them, right? Anybody who fell down, I was killing them and they were landing one on top of the other. Nobody even looked up because I was killing them so fast. If anybody fell down, they did not get back up because I'm killing them that quick. And some of them even jumped into the water. So he's talking about this, right? And you may look at this and some of this is hyperbole, right? So we know that Ramses is not killing, 100,000 people by himself. He's saying I'm killing thousands. He's saying I'm killing hundreds of thousands of people. He's not killing 100,000 people by himself. But the beauty of the story and the history of it, we know the battle did take place. The history of it and the poetic nature of it and the belief in God and what it can bring you to your spirit, the way that it can touch you and make you think about things, times in your life where things were a challenge to you, make you think about things that might seem impossible and be able to go ahead and do it. That's the remarkableness of that's why it's great. And so he talks about then the leader of the Hittite army then sending in leaders from the coalition of nations that were against him. So different people like the Arun and the Darnadi and various people started to send their chariots, because there were 1,000 chariots apparently that he says in his documentation. They started to send their chariots and their men after him, and he's fighting them off one by one. He's killing them one by one. 1,000 chariots come right straight towards Ramses II, and he begins to fight off this men just one after the other, knocking them down and killing them. Apparently this is what he's saying. He's killing them. And then he is then in a situation where he starts to win. And obviously, as I mentioned, there's hyperbole here, but he starts to win. And then as he starts to win later on, his army begins to catch up with him. And some of the ones who ran away and did not fight begin to come back. And they begin to see the battlefield. He's killed all these people and he's destroyed all these people. And they begin to step over the bodies and come to approach Ramses II and basically say, you are great. You are the defender of Kemet. God is with you. You are going to be the one who lives forever and does this amazing thing. And they start praising him. And Ramses II turns to them and say, you who did not fight. You're not worthy of my trust. You did not stand with me on the battlefield. You're coming here and you're saying all these grandiose things. I'm not buying it. I'm not paying any attention to it. You did not fight. I treated you well. I gave you things that soldiers don't typically get. I gave you passes. I gave you the ability to do things that you didn't necessarily have the right to do because you were a soldier. There were things responsibility that you had that I let you not have because I thought you were going to be on the battlefield with me. I gave positions to sons of fathers so that the son would take over the position of the father so that you would be well taken care of, so that when this day came, a day like the day came, you would be with me. But all of you ran. None of you were here. Nobody was here but my armor bearer and my horses. And he said, my horses, I will thank them. I will reward them in a way where they'll be able to eat corn in the presence of Ra forever. And while I'm there in the palace, when I get back to the palace, I would treat these horses with respect because they didn't run. And my armor bearer, who stood by me, even though he was scared, he would get to have my clothing, my war material, if you will, that I wore into battle. That'll be his forever as a keepsake. And so Ramses II begins to go, then come back to ancient Kemet. He comes back to Waset. He has some people that he's taken prisoner and he's claiming victory. Now, a lot of historic sources will say, hey, it wasn't really a victory. It was probably more of a draw. Obviously we know he didn't kill hundreds of thousands of people on the battlefield, that maybe it was a draw, but whatever happened, Ramses II celebrated this and saw God as taking care of him and taking care of the battlefield. And so much so that some years later, some 15 or 16 years later, there's a documented peace treaty that the Hittite king sends to Ramses II because he's ruling for a long period of time. And he gives him a treaty that basically says, you know what, let's agree not to fight. Let's agree you are a great king. We're great people. Let's agree that people who are exiled in your place, you'll send them back to here. Anybody who's exiled from you in my place, I'll send them back to you. We will agree to not fight. And this is one of the early peace treaties that we have a document of. It's not the first one, I don't believe, but it's one of the early ones that there's documentation of. So you may find famous places having a copy of this or pointing to this. Even places like the UN and various places like that might document this and talk about this peace treaty that came from the Battle of Kadesh. But at the end of the day, Ramses II looked at this as if this was a victory, that this was something that took place where he was in a rock and a hard place. He was between a rock and a hard place, and he had nobody to call on but God. And when he called on God, and I know you may have been in that situation, I've been in a situation where there's nobody else who can come to you. There's nobody else who can defend you, even though you might think you have soldiers and your buddies and your boys around you, and the things that you think might protect you and defend you, they're not there. And you have nobody to call on but God, and God responds. And Amun responded to Ramses II. So that's what he said, and that's the account, and that's what happened in the Battle of Kadesh. And I wanted to share that. And if you have any questions or more things you'd like to talk about, please let me know. Put it down in the comments below, and we'll share this and we'll talk more about this. So thank you so much for listening. God bless you, and I thank you for sharing this.